Today, I would like to share a story with you. Coming home late from work and finding my husband sleeping with his mistress in our bed, I did not make a scene, I just quietly left. The next day, both of them were in for a massive shock when they checked their phones. Please follow along as the story unfolds. My marriage to David was entering its 5th year, a period long enough for outsiders to look at us and constantly praise us as the model American family. I worked as a mid-level manager at a major pharmaceutical corporation in Chicago. My job was incredibly busy with back-to-back projects, but in return, the income was excellent. I had the financial strength to cover all our household expenses and provide for both sides of our families. David worked as the director of operations for a state-funded municipal agency. His income was not as high as mine, but outwardly, he always presented himself as a calm, devoted husband who did not gamble, drink heavily, or stay out all night with his friends. My mother-in-law was a widow who had lost her husband early on. She poured all her love and expectations into her only son. She constantly bragged to the neighbors that I was blessed beyond measure to have married her boy. Yet, she always secretly harbored resentment because I had not yet given her a grandson to carry on the family name. I believed in that fake, peaceful facade until the appearance of Chloe exposed the terrible reality of it all. Chloe was a new hire in David's department, having joined less than 6 months ago. She was a recent college graduate with an innocent face and a sweet, flattering way of speaking. During a few of David's corporate events, my family attended, and through a woman's intuition, I noticed the way Chloe looked at my husband. It was entirely unlike the respect a subordinate usually reserves for a superior. Recently, David started paying more attention to his appearance. He bought a few expensive bottles of cologne, set up multi-layer passcodes on his iPhone, and occasionally jumped out of his skin when a text message arrived. Using heavy workloads as an excuse, conversations between us as husband and wife grew sparse. I am not an easygoing woman who lets others make a fool out of me. Therefore, I decided to set up a little test to see exactly how bold they dared to be. My company's new product launch project was in its final sprint. For the whole week, I had been leaving early and coming home late to review project files. That morning, before backing my SUV out of the garage, I purposely lingered in the living room and sent David a text. The message was brief, informing him that I had to stay at the downtown corporate office tonight with the executive board to finalize the bidding documents and definitely would not be coming home to sleep. David replied instantly, telling me to remember to eat well, not to overwork myself, and promising that he would stay home and clean the condo to make me happy. Reading that message full of fake concern, I found it laughable that someone harboring dark intentions always tries so hard to act perfect. That night, I did stay at the office, but the work progressed faster than expected. At 3:00 a.m., I finalized the last stack of files on my desk, shut down my computer, grabbed my designer tote, and headed down to the parking garage. The streets of downtown Chicago at 3:00 a.m. were deserted, the yellow streetlights casting a dim glow on the asphalt. Driving through the familiar avenues, I was in no rush, still hoping in my heart that my test would fail. But when I opened the door and walked in, my husband was not sleeping soundly alone. I parked in the basement of our high-rise condo, took the elevator up to the 12th floor, and walked down the quiet, soundless hallway. Standing before our door, I carefully and slowly turned the key, so the metal lock would not make a clicking noise. The heavy wooden door opened. The condo was pitch black. The moment the light from the hallway illuminated the welcome mat, my last shred of hope shattered into pieces. Placed neatly next to David's dress shoes was a pair of nude-size 7 Christian Louboutin heels. It was the exact pair of shoes I had seen Chloe wearing at David's corporate holiday party. I slipped off my shoes and walked barefoot on the hardwood floor, not turning on any lights, heading straight for the master bedroom. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, a dim sliver of light spilling out from the bedside lamp, clearly illuminating the scene that struck my eyes. On the expensive marital bed, complete with the premium sheets I had painstakingly picked out, David and Chloe were sleeping soundly, wrapped in each other's arms. Their clothes were thrown haphazardly under the windowsill and draped over the small bedroom sofa. Chloe had her head buried in David's chest, while David's arm was wrapped protectively around her. Betrayal was present right inside the home I had bought with my own money, right on my own bed. The pain and fury boiled up to the absolute limit. But my reason immediately pulled me back, reminding me that throwing a screaming fit right now would only make me a laughingstock and give them a chance to deny everything later. I pulled my smartphone out of my bag and turned on high-definition video recording. Standing at the threshold, I carefully filmed David's closed eyes and Chloe's smudged makeup. then panned the lens over the pile of clothes and women's lingerie scattered on the floor. The video lasted nearly 2 minutes, capturing every single piece of evidence without missing a thing. Once finished, I pressed save, stepped backward into the living room, and gently pulled the bedroom door shut exactly as it had been. I walked to the front door, put my shoes back on, locked the door carefully, and went straight to the elevator. They were too confident in my lie, sleeping so heavily that they had no idea their death sentence had just been initiated from this very second. When a mature woman faces the ultimate betrayal, she does not choose to scream. I chose to make them pay the highest price on every possible front. Leaving the condo building, I drove straight to a large hotel about 2 miles away on a main avenue. The front desk clerk looked at me with surprise, seeing a woman checking in at nearly 4:00 a.m. I did not bother to explain. Taking the room key, I rode the elevator to the 5th floor, tossed my bag on the bed, and immediately fired up my laptop. The hotel room smelled faintly of cheap air freshener, but it provided me with a space of absolute silence to work. The punishment plan needed to be executed immediately. Before dawn, all evidence had to be secured at the highest level. The first thing I did was open my phone's photo gallery and upload the video I had just taken to 3 different cloud storage accounts. I carefully emailed a backup copy to a secret email address that David knew absolutely nothing about. This evidence was my most important weapon, and I absolutely could not afford to lose it or have it corrupted by any technical glitch. With the media secured, I logged into our online banking system. Our marriage maintained a joint pool of funds, but our payroll accounts were strictly separate. I quickly changed all the passwords for the 3 banking apps on my phone, strengthening the biometric security layers. Next, I checked the joint savings account currently under David's name. The displayed figure was completely intact at exactly $70,000. This money was largely my project bonuses from the past 2 years, combined with a small fraction of David's salary contributions. I memorized this balance to prepare for the upcoming legal chess moves. By 5:00 a.m., the sky outside the hotel window began turning a pale gray, signaling a new day was about to begin. I sat curled up in an armchair, my mind calculating every detailed step to unmask the adulterous pair. Catching them red-handed was easy, but leaving the betrayer no room for denial and stripping away the dignity that David and his mother always prided themselves on was the real goal. David always played the role of the model husband in front of our families, and my mother-in-law always blindly defended her son. If I simply produced the video, they would find every excuse to justify it, perhaps even turning the blame on me for neglecting the family. I needed living witnesses, people who could not deny the truth once their own eyes witnessed that filthy scene. I opened my tote bag and pulled out the shared household iPad, which I occasionally brought along to read documents. David's biggest weakness was his technological carelessness. He used the same Apple ID for his personal iPhone and this iPad to download apps, accidentally syncing the entire text message system. I opened the messaging app, and my eyes were immediately met with the flirtatious texts they had been sending each other since yesterday afternoon, scheduling their date and discussing what to order for dinner at my house. I carefully took screenshots of that entire conversation, securing it as supplementary evidence to counter any potential arguments from David. At 6:15 a.m., the time when older folks usually wake up to exercise, I used my phone to send a text to my mother. The content was highly urgent, stating that I was out of town on a business trip, but the neighbors had just called to say David came home completely drunk last night, and this morning he would not open the door despite constant knocking. I begged my mother to go over and check on him, fearing he might be having a stroke inside the condo. Immediately, I sent the exact same message to my mother-in-law. She lived alone in a suburban townhouse about a 20-minute taxi ride away from my building. A mother who doted on her son as much as she did would undoubtedly panic, hail a cab, and rush over instantly upon hearing her precious only son was at risk of a stroke and in mortal danger. With the parental summoning plan complete, I moved to the next step. At the exact same time, I called the direct hotline of the building's property management. My voice was frantic, expressing the extreme anxiety of a wife far away from home. I stated my name, read my unit number, and clearly explained that my husband had a history of high blood pressure and was home alone last night. His office had called this morning, but no one could reach him. I demanded that management immediately send security guards and call a locksmith to break down the door for a life-saving emergency. Hearing the severe nature of the situation, the duty manager immediately agreed to dispatch a team upstairs to check and promised to get the door open as fast as possible. Everything was set up perfectly. The mother-in-law, my parents, the building security, and a locksmith formed an absolutely flawless coalition of witnesses on a beautiful morning. I closed my laptop and walked into the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. Looking in the mirror, my eyes had slight dark circles from staying awake all night, but my gaze was incredibly sharp and resolute. I changed back into my crisp corporate attire, grabbed my bag, walked out of the hotel room, and drove back near my condo, finding a hidden corner to wait for the main play to officially begin. At 5 minutes to 7, I parked in an empty lot across from the high-rise. Sitting still in my car, observing through the dark-tinted windows, I saw the streets starting to get crowded. The noise of traffic and the rushing rhythm of the city blended with the suspense rising in my chest. Exactly as predicted, just 10 minutes after I sent the text, I saw my parents rushing on foot from the adjacent neighborhood. My dad walked ahead, while my mom jogged frantically behind him with a look of extreme worry. Almost simultaneously, a taxi slammed its brakes in front of the building lobby. My mother-in-law did not even wait for the car to fully stop before she threw the door open and practically leaped out, storming straight toward the elevator lobby with a pale face, tightly clutching her old canvas purse. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. The minute hand pointed exactly to 7:15. The lock-picking process was certainly underway on the 12th floor. Everything was going exactly according to the script I had written. The space inside my car was so quiet I could clearly hear my own breathing, my eyes never leaving the entrance of the building. My phone, resting on the passenger seat, suddenly began vibrating violently. The screen displayed an incoming call from my mother. I hit the answer button, trying to maintain the most panicked tone possible, asking if she had arrived, if the door was open, if David was okay, and if they needed to call an ambulance right away. On the other end of the line, my mother's voice cracked with rage, accompanied by choked sobs. The loud chaos echoed through the phone. I could clearly hear men shouting, the sound of objects crashing, and vicious cursing. My mother screamed into the phone, demanding that I take the day off from work and come home immediately. She yelled that there was no stroke or medical emergency at all, but that she had witnessed her son-in-law bringing a tramp home to sleep right in her daughter's bed. Her voice trembled with deep resentment, the words catching in her throat. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, I calmly asked her to explain the situation clearly and inquired if my mother-in-law was present. My mother replied distinctly that my mother-in-law was right there, and the entire building security team was also standing around witnessing the true face of her precious son-in-law. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law stood as mute as a clam, not daring to utter a single syllable in his defense. My mother urged me to come home right away to handle this filthy mess. Through my mother's ongoing call, I could completely visualize the chaos unfolding inside that unit. The locksmith had just popped the deadbolt, allowing the security team and the 3 parents to burst inside. They rushed straight to the master bedroom, thinking David was unconscious on the floor. But what awaited them when the door swung wide open was not a sick man needing CPR, but David and Chloe, severely lacking in clothing, sleeping soundly in each other's arms on the pristine white mattress. The loud noise startled the lovers awake. David fell into absolute panic when the bright room lights were flicked on, revealing 2 uniformed guards, a locksmith holding tools, and 3 stunned parents standing around the bed. Chloe let out a piercing shriek, desperately pulling the blanket up to cover herself and shrinking deep into the corner of the bed to hide her face. David scrambled to find his clothes on the floor, but the room was already in turmoil. He grabbed a pair of trousers and pulled them on, his face devoid of color, his mouth stammering incoherent syllables as he met the furious gaze of his father-in-law. My father is a retired military veteran with an incredibly strict temperament. He did not bother scolding David. Instead, he stepped forward and delivered a devastating, earth-shattering slap right across David's face, making him stumble and collapse onto the edge of the bed. My mother lunged forward, intending to grab the blanket-wrapped tramp by the hair, but the security guards intervened just in time, advising her to stay calm. My mother-in-law, who every other day would thump her chest boasting about her only son while chatting away endlessly, now stood leaning against the wooden wall, her face drained of every drop of blood. She had turned completely to stone, unable to force out a single word to justify the blatantly disgusting actions of her golden boy happening right before her eyes. The presence of the building management staff meant this was no longer a matter kept behind closed doors. By tomorrow, this entire high-rise would know the story of the husband who brought a woman home the second his wife left town. I hung up the phone, the corners of my mouth curling up slightly. The opening act had been a massive success. David and Chloe were stripped of all their decent masks right in front of the people who needed to witness it the most. They had no room left to deny anything. But my goal was not merely a loud confrontation followed by cleaning up the aftermath like other resigned wives. I wanted them to pay a heavy price on every front, including their reputation, their careers, and their finances. I started the engine, turned the steering wheel, and merged onto the main road, heading straight toward my corporate office instead of driving home. I was still going to work today. I needed to decisively resolve my pending files this morning to clear the path for a long legal battle ahead. Let the adults handle the chaotic surface-level drama at the house. I was going to be the one to sever this agonizing tumor right from its roots. The atmosphere in my office that morning was as normal as any other day. I sat at my desk, utilizing high-level mental clarity to approve the final emails for the project. After sending the project completion report to the CEO, I walked over to Human Resources and requested 3 days of paid time off due to a sudden family emergency. The request was approved swiftly since my performance metrics were always top of the department. After handing over my tasks to my deputy, I locked my office door, rolled up my sleeves, and initiated the second strike. The filthy behavior of David and Chloe was not just confined to the family circle. I had to let them taste the feeling of being unmasked in front of their colleagues, the place where they always played the role of upstanding professionals. Chloe and David worked at the same agency. Since it was a state-funded organization, their code of ethics for civil servants and staff was incredibly strict. Maintaining internal reputation was a matter of survival for end-of-year performance reviews, and I decided to strike right at that fatal weak point. I opened an incognito browser window and created a new email account containing absolutely no personal information linking back to me. I attached the video I recorded last night, but prior to this, I used editing software to strip the audio and blur my face where it reflected in the wardrobe mirror. In the video, David and Chloe's faces were razor sharp. The location was undeniably our familiar downtown condo. I filled in the recipient addresses, targeting the general inbox for David's HR department, while copying the branch director and the agency's union president. The subject line was concise and fierce, reporting severe ethical violations by a mid-level manager. The body of the email clearly laid out the facts. Mr. David was having an illicit affair with his subordinate, Chloe, creating a toxic impact on the agency's reputation and destroying another family's marriage. Reviewing the information one last time, I clicked send. It was an irreversible transaction. The physical slap my dad delivered that morning was just the prelude. This career-ending strike was the lethal blow that would prevent David from ever lifting his head again. Barely an hour later, the group chat of wives working in my industry began buzzing. The news spread at lightning speed. I learned that during the morning executive briefing, that anonymous email was opened. The agency's board of directors was absolutely furious. David was immediately summoned to a closed-door meeting room on the 6th floor. Confronted with undeniable video evidence in crystal-clear definition, David had no way to defend himself. A decision to suspend him for 15 days pending an ethical review was issued on the spot. Chloe was ordered to write a formal statement of misconduct and was temporarily banned from joining any new departmental projects. At 11:00 a.m., I drove from my office back to the condo. The place was now strangely quiet. The morning chaos had subsided. The wooden door bore scratch marks left by the locksmith, a stark reminder of the shocking event that had just passed. I pushed the door open and saw my parents sitting on the living room sofa, both looking exhausted and furious. My mother-in-law had slinked away at some point, too humiliated to face my parents. David was sitting at the dining table with his head bowed, his clothes wrinkled and covered in dust. Seeing me walk in, my dad shot up, pointed toward the door, and demanded that I pack my bags and move back to their house immediately. He declared, "This house is unlivable now," and loudly cursed the despicable man who had brought a loose woman in to trample over our family. My parents refused to let me endure this humiliation for another minute. I walked over to the sofa, grasped my mother's hand, and calmly reassured them. "Mom, Dad, please calm down. I have already handled everything. Let me assure you, I am not going back to your house right now. This is the condo I bought with my own money. The one who needs to get the hell out of here is not me, but that betraying man over there." Hearing me say this, David raised his head. His bloodshot eyes shifted from fearful to defensive and angry. He had just received his suspension notice from work, so he knew the leaked office scandal definitely had my hand in it. He growled, asking if I planned to completely ruin his life. He blamed me for filming the clip and sending it to his office to make him lose his job and his title, he hissed, cursing me as a ruthless, heartless woman. I let out a harsh laugh and shot back right in his face that he had destroyed his own life. He brought a woman home to sleep in his wife's bed, spent his wife's money, and yet expected me to cook them chicken soup for breakfast? I declared that I did not have the free time to argue with a fraud. Then, I walked straight into my home office. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a file I had prepared a week ago, stepped back out, and slammed the stack of papers down hard on the glass dining table right in front of David. White sheets of paper scattered around. On top was the divorce petition. In the petitioner section, I had already signed my name with bold, decisive strokes. I demanded that he sign it immediately to resolve the asset division quickly. I will handle this through my lawyer, I announced clearly, my eyes locking onto the man I once called my husband, ordering him to pack his personal belongings and get out of my house right this second. Every ounce of affection was permanently dead. Just as I finished speaking, Chloe stepped out from the corner of the living room looking like an absolute wreck. It turned out she had been hiding in the blind spot near the balcony all this time, too afraid to show her face anywhere due to the humiliation. Her clothes were disheveled, her hair was a rat's nest, and her eyes were swollen shut from crying. Seeing me throw the divorce papers on the table, she suddenly rushed forward and dropped to her knees right at my feet. Chloe clasped her hands together, tears streaming down her face, begging for my forgiveness. She sobbed loudly, claiming she had absolutely no intention of destroying my family. She swore that David had deceived her this entire time. Chloe justified herself by saying David constantly complained, claiming that he and I had been separated since last year and were just waiting for the court to divide the assets. She wailed that she was just a naive girl fresh out of college who fell into this man's trap. She insisted that if she had known I still lived here and cared for the family, she would not have dared step foot through that door for $1 million. The acting performance of a caught-in-the-act mistress is always so perfect it borders on comical. But it could not fool someone holding a mountain of evidence like me. I stood with my arms crossed, looking down at her clumsy theatrical display. Not even a final shred of pity could sprout in the face of such blatant lies. I took a step back to avoid Chloe's dirty hands touching my pant leg and coldly told her to stand up. I said directly, an educated woman should not lower herself to doing vile things and then blame her circumstances. I challenged her logic. If she truly believed we were separated, why did she have to sneak around, waiting until I was away on a night business trip to creep into my house to sleep? People who have been tricked do not act with calculated stealth like thieves. Chloe choked on her words, her eyes darting around wildly for rescue from David. But David was currently too busy dealing with his own rage. The cowardice of a cheating man shows when he is backed into a corner. He will turn and tear at the very partner he shared a bed with to protect his own pathetic ego. I opened the folder on the table and pulled out a stack of printed standard paper. This was a complete backup of the social media messages I had extracted from David's iPad. I tossed the stack of papers onto the glass table with a sharp smack, pointing at the pile and demanding they both open their eyes and read. I read the dates and messages out loud and clear. On April 15th, while I was in the hospital having my appendix removed, Chloe was texting you, insulting me for being old and urging you to go home, steal our savings book, and take her on a trip to Miami. I interrogated her. What kind of separation involves knowing my exact hospital schedule so you can plan a vacation using my money? At this point, Chloe fell completely silent, backing away toward the sofa, covering her face and sobbing violently, not daring to utter a single word in defiance. Seeing that all his evidence was exposed, David dropped the nice guy act. He slammed his hand on the table, sprang up, and glared at me. David yelled at me to shut up, pointing a finger in my face, accusing me of relying on my money to say whatever I wanted. He blamed me for burying my face in work all day and coming home to sleep like a corpse, never caring about her husband's feelings. David rationalized that a man dealing with stressful work needed a gentle wife to take care of him in bed, not a dry corporate manager. He brazenly declared that his seeking out another woman was because I forced him into it. Because I did not know how to be a proper wife, he had made a mistake. My father, standing nearby, could no longer contain himself upon hearing the twisted words of his son-in-law. He stepped forward, pointing right at David's face, cursing him as an ungrateful wretch. His daughter went to work to earn money to maintain this house and take care of David's family, yet David dared to repay her by bringing a tramp home and then shifting the blame to his wife. My dad declared that no real man blames his wife to justify his own depravity. I pulled my dad's arm back, gently advising him not to waste his breath on this kind of person. I turned to look at David one last time, my eyes devoid of any wavering emotion, affirming every word clearly. His marriage was a total failure when he brought his mistress to sleep in his wife's bed and spent his wife's blood, sweat, and tears. If you are a scumbag, just admit you are a scumbag. I decisively ordered David to pack his personal belongings and leave the condo before 3:00 p.m. If he did not sign the papers, it did not matter. I would file for a contested divorce. I then called building management, requesting they send 2 security guards up to monitor David and Chloe's moving process to ensure safety. They had absolutely no avenue left to stay in this condo for another second. The next morning, I submitted a request for a week of paid leave to completely resolve the legal procedures. The first thing I did that day was head to the law office of Robert, an old family friend specializing in family and divorce law. I brought the property deed, marriage certificate, proof of income, and, of course, the video capturing the adultery from yesterday dawn. Attorney Robert carefully reviewed the documents after hearing my explanation regarding the $70,000 joint savings account currently under David's name. He frowned, analyzing the practical situation. Robert explained that even though the account was in David's name, it was established during the marriage. Under the law, it was still considered marital property. However, asking the court for an emergency injunction to freeze the account was not as simple and magical as it looked in the movies. Robert made the process clear to me. We had to file a lawsuit, submit the paperwork, wait for the court to docket it, and pay the filing fees. Not to mention, to request a court order to freeze assets, I would likely have to post a bond equivalent to the frozen amount to mitigate damages if the request proved wrongful. This entire administrative process would take at least a few business days. Robert looked at me with concern, emphasizing that since David was just suspended from his job that morning, he had plenty of time to go to a teller window and clean out the assets. If David withdrew all the cash today, any court order issued later would be completely useless, and trying to recover the funds would be an agonizing battle. Sitting in the law office, I quickly strung the information together, realizing I needed an immediate solution to buy time before the law officially intervened. I opened David's iPad and pulled up the photo of the physical bank booklet, account info I had carefully saved. The biggest weakness of the banking system is its strict security protocols. I decided to use that exact strictness to handcuff a greedy husband. First, I opened the mobile banking app on my phone, entered David's username, and intentionally typed the wrong password 5 consecutive times. The digital banking system immediately threw an error and sent a notification that online transactions were temporarily locked for security reasons. All of David's online transfer capabilities were officially neutralized. Next, I picked up my phone and called the customer service hotline of the bank that issued the savings account. When the agent answered, I used an incredibly frantic and urgent tone, stating my name, reading David's exact social security number, his registered phone number, account number, and the savings ledger serial number. I reported that my condo had been broken into this morning. All personal IDs, property deeds, and the bank ledger had been stolen. I demanded the bank enact an emergency lockdown on this savings account to prevent the thief from impersonating him and withdrawing the funds. The agent verified the information in the system and informed me that according to asset protection policies, upon receiving a report of lost physical documents and suspected fraud, the entire account would be frozen from withdrawals immediately for 24 to 48 hours. The account holder would have to personally bring their physical ID to their home branch, fill out a verification report, and wait for the branch manager's approval before it could be unlocked. This precious window of time was more than enough for Attorney Robert to finalize the lawsuit and file it with the court. At 11:00 a.m., while I was having coffee with Robert at a cafe across from the Cook County Circuit Court reviewing the petition, my phone rang. The caller ID showed David. I put it on speakerphone and placed it on the glass table so the lawyer could clearly hear the true face of the betrayer. As soon as I answered, David was already roaring through the phone, accompanied by vulgar swearing. He loudly demanded to know what the hell I had done to the bank account, saying the teller just informed him his online account was locked due to too many failed passwords, and the physical account was under an emergency freeze due to a theft report called in that morning. The bank adamantly refused to allow a withdrawal, demanding he write an incident report and wait for the security department to verify this mess. David bitterly accused me of trying to steal his hard-earned money. Hearing that screaming, I found it laughable how blind greed made this terrible man. I picked up the phone and replied with the calmest tone possible. I told him that out of that $70,000, $50,000 was my hard-earned project bonus money. He had only contributed a tiny fraction. I affirmed I was not robbing anyone but simply utilizing my legal right to protect my assets from someone showing clear signs of theft and asset hiding. The court would be the place to clearly distribute who that money belonged to, and I told him straight to his face not to expect to withdraw a single penny from that bank to buy designer bags or rent an apartment for his mistress. On the other end of the line, mixed with David's furious panting, came the shrill voice of my mother-in-law. She snatched the phone from her son and started causing a scene in public. She cursed me as a wicked, ungrateful woman who could not even bear an heir. She challenged me to take it to court, aggressively insisting her son had the right to take half of that money because he had been the breadwinner for the past 5 years. I did not want to waste my breath arguing with a mother who defied all logic to defend her son's blatant wrongdoings. I briefly stated that the law operates on income records and evidence of adultery, not on spit. I advised her to save her energy to take care of her precious son, who was currently facing the prospect of unemployment. Saying that, I hung up and immediately blocked David and his mother's numbers, so I would not be bothered. Attorney Robert nodded in approval of my sharp and decisive action. This move to lock down their finances left David and Chloe completely on the defensive. Without money in hand, the sweet promises of a cheating man would quickly reveal their true nature. Love built on a foundation of lies and materialism will collapse on itself when the wallet runs dry. I paid for the coffee, grabbed my bag and documents, and walked with my lawyer across to the courthouse to file the petition, mentally prepared for the next dirty counterattacks from their side. Cut off entirely from financial resources and facing the risk of losing her job while the savings account was locked, Chloe revealed her true colors as a cornered street thug. She understood she could not fight me legally, so she chose to attack the weakest point of a corporate manager: reputation and credibility on social media. 3 days after I filed for divorce, I received a message from Jessica, a close colleague at my company. She sent me a link with a frantic text urging me to open it immediately. The link led to a post in a massive local Facebook group called Chicago Bad Husbands and Wives, which had hundreds of thousands of members. The post was made by a newly created burner account with no profile picture. The title was in bold, all caps: Expo Segunda, Gunda Kagunda, Segunda, Egunda, Presegunda, Ixegunda, Endegunda, and spousal abuse. I patiently sat and scrolled through every line of blatant fabricated lies in the post. The anonymous author claimed to be a family member of David, stepping forward to accuse me of being a demon disguised as a perfect wife. She described me as a financial control freak, giving my husband exactly a $200 allowance a month, forcing him to do all the household chores, from cooking to scrubbing toilets. Even more disgustingly, the post falsely claimed I had a shady relationship with my company's CEO to get promoted. And because of my promiscuous past, I was now infertile and could not even birth a child. The author cleverly manipulated the narrative, turning David into a gentleman who endured 5 years of humiliation just to protect his home. David finding another woman was described as an escape from marital hell, a justified pursuit of happiness by a victim of emotional abuse. The post did not mention a single word about them sneaking into my home to sleep in my bed. The power of dirty media is truly terrifying. Under the comments section were thousands of people viciously cursing me out. The netizens did not care about right or wrong. They banded together to insult me with the most obscene language. They called me a barren, evil woman. They commented that throwing a wife like me away was the right move. Some people even creepily tracked down my personal profile, took screenshots of my old posts, and brought them back to the group to mock me. My phone constantly received message requests from strangers sending me abuse. It signaled a media crisis aimed directly at my personal reputation. My parents also read these details after relatives sent them the links. My mother called me sobbing, heartbroken that her daughter was being wrongly accused, and turned into a public laughingstock. She suggested I go online and post a correction, or call that mistress and scream at her to blow off steam. I gently advised my mother to stay calm, telling her strictly not to reply to any comments online, to just treat it like trash on the street, not worth picking up. The more you argue with a mindless mob, the easier it is to fall into the enemy's trap. I was not bothered by the baseless insults. In fact, I saw the net I had cast reeling in results beyond my expectations. Chloe was incredibly stupid to leave such clear digital footprints. With high-level focus, I used my computer to take screenshots of the entire post, the defamatory comments, and copied the URLs of those burner accounts, saving everything carefully into a separate folder. Later that afternoon, I contacted a local legal process server in the city to formally record and notarize all of this online defamation. This notarized record held legal weight as evidence in court. Chloe thought using a burner account could help her dodge responsibility, but she did not understand cyber laws. Once authorities got involved, the IP address of the computer that made the post would point right at the perpetrator. I had prepared everything to counterattack a decisive blow that would completely crush their fake masks and prove to them that angering a highly logical woman is a fatal mistake. On Friday morning, I brought the notarized documents and my entire file of evidence to the Chicago Police Department precinct where David and Chloe lived. I officially filed a criminal complaint, requesting the Cybercrimes Unit investigate the acts of defamation and cyber harassment. The intake officer evaluated my evidence as extremely thorough and promised to begin verification immediately. With the legal side handled, I drove to a quiet cafe tucked away in an alley. The person I was meeting was Jessica, my best friend from college, who was currently a director at a PR and crisis management firm. Jessica had an incredibly sharp instinct for social media. When she heard my summary and saw the thick file, she slammed her hand on the table, furiously cursing that shameless group of people. Jessica told me I was too nice, which was why they dared to walk all over me, and she promised to help me handle this cleanly, to show those people what it really means to play with the media. I nodded and pulled my ultimate weapon out of my bag. It was the detailed bank statements from David's account over the past year, which I had quietly extracted thanks to the personal email account he had forgotten to log out of on the shared iPad. I pointed out the abnormal expenses to Jessica. On April 20th, a $5,000 transferred to a luxury boutique for an imported designer bag. On June 10th, a $6,500 payment for airfare and a premium hotel suite in Miami. And countless small transfers of $20 or $30 with notes like breakfast money or gift sent directly to an account under Chloe's name. At 8:00 p.m. that night, during peak social media traffic hours, Jessica made her move. A massive community page focusing on local news and lifestyle, with over 1 million followers, suddenly posted a rebuttal. The headline specifically called out, "The truth behind the abused husband post, unmasking the real villain playing victim." The article was polished by Jessica with a razor-sharp, objective tone, based entirely on hard evidence rather than emotional storytelling. The post summarized the events and then unleashed a series of fatal blows that obliterated David and Chloe's pitiful facade. First came the footage extracted from the condo's Ring camera. It showed David unlocking the door and leading Chloe inside at 10:00 p.m., and then the scene of the whole family busting through the door at 7:00 a.m. The faces were legally blurred just enough, but anyone who knew them could easily tell who was who. Next were screenshots of the bank statements I provided. The article pointed out the hilarious contradiction. A husband claiming to be financially abused with a $200 allowance could somehow easily transfer thousands of dollars for designer bags and jewelry for his mistress. The dates on the bank statements perfectly matched the times Chloe posted photos of her luxurious vacations on her own page. Finally, the post attached a photo of the receipt for the criminal complaint filed with the police department for defamation, serving as a firm declaration that the wife was not intimidated and was using the law to protect herself. Within just 2 hours, the post exploded with shares at hurricane speed. Public opinion flipped instantly. The same people who had ganged up to curse me now swarmed David and Chloe's personal pages to attack them viciously. The internet mob quickly figured out where they worked and flooded the agency's pages, leaving 1-star reviews and demanding the termination of these unethical employees. At 10:00 p.m., my phone lit up with a call from David. I put it on speaker, sitting calmly as I listened to the utterly panicked man on the other end. David begged me to tell my friends to take the post down, promising he would obediently sign the divorce papers and not demand any asset division. He cried, saying the agency had just called, threatening to fire him immediately if this scandal continued to spread. Chloe was being harassed so badly via text that she had to turn off her phone and hide in her apartment. I took a sip of warm tea, my tone gentle but resolute, and told him that spilled water cannot be gathered back. They started this media war, so now they had to take responsibility for the consequences. I informed him that the court had docketed the divorce petition and that I would see him in court to settle things in black and white. Finished, I hung up, turned off my phone completely, and went to sleep soundly, leaving behind a long night of panic for the betrayers who were now tasting the bitter fruit they had grown themselves. Within just a week after the social media counterattack, David and Chloe's lives completely collapsed. Under immense pressure from public opinion and continuous complaints from partners and the public, the agency's board decided to unilaterally terminate both of their contracts. David officially lost his director title and the stable income he once took such pride in. Chloe was utterly humiliated, too afraid to step outside her apartment complex for fear of being pointed at by acquaintances, having become the center of contempt. Backed into a corner, with no money or jobs to hold on to, and the savings account still frozen by the bank pending resolution, the lovers began getting into explosive fights. But Chloe was a cunning fox. She understood that if David dumped her now, she would lose everything. To flip the script, she decided to play her final trump card, striking right at David's mother's desperate desire for a grandson, a fetal ultrasound printout. On Tuesday afternoon, while I was in an executive meeting at my company, my mother called me, sounding incredibly agitated. She demanded I leave work and come straight to their house because my mother-in-law had shown up, causing a massive scene and screaming nonstop at the front gate. I had to excuse myself from the CEO, grab my keys, and drive straight to my parents' house. As soon as I walked through the gate, I heard my mother-in-law's booming voice from the living room. I walked in and saw my parents sitting on the sofa looking furious, while my mother-in-law stood in the center of the room, triumphantly waving a piece of paper. David stood cowardly behind her back, head bowed, not daring to look at anyone. Seeing me arrive, my mother-in-law immediately pointed right at my face, lifted her chin, cleared her throat, and declared her reason for being there. She told my parents that our family lacked good karma, which was why they raised a useless daughter who couldn't pop out a child after 5 years of marriage. She proudly announced that Chloe was pregnant with her family's grandson, and their bloodline could not be left wandering the streets. She demanded that I know my place and sign over the high-rise condo to David as compensation for his wasted youth. She declared that since I couldn't bear children, I had to walk away empty-handed to make room for her grandson to live. My dad, red with anger, shot up, ready to throw her out of the house. But I put my hand up to stop him. I calmly walked over to the coffee table and picked up the ultrasound paper to examine it closely. The paper clearly listed Chloe's name, noting the fetus was 7 weeks along, projected to be a boy. I looked at the date of the examination, my eyes narrowing slightly as a massive suspicion flashed through my mind. Just 3 weeks ago, at David's corporate holiday party, I had seen with my own eyes Chloe downing glasses of red wine back to back and dancing energetically. A woman in the early weeks of pregnancy is usually extremely cautious, often suffers from morning sickness, and strictly abstains from alcohol. This contradiction triggered my intuition. Something was very wrong here, and a new play was being staged. I faked a sigh, dropped the paper on the table, rubbed my temples, and purposely put on an exhausted, resigned expression. I lowered my voice, telling my mother-in-law, "Since things have reached this point, I don't want to stubbornly hold on to a husband who no longer has feelings for me. Take Chloe home and take good care of the pregnancy. As for the assets, I will review and renegotiate with my lawyer. If it's reasonable, I will work with the bank to withdraw the theft report, unlock the account, and give David some capital to start a business and raise his child. Please go home, don't make a scene, and affect my parents' health anymore." Hearing this, my mother-in-law looked visibly triumphant. Thinking I had surrendered to the grandson label she always craved, she smirked, telling David to help her out, not forgetting to drop a sarcastic remark on her way out. "Just get the paperwork done quickly. Don't let people say you're a bitter woman standing in the way of a new family's happiness." David shot me a furtive glance, silently following his mother out the door, not daring to open his mouth. They had absolutely no idea that my retreat was a sophisticated trap. I needed time to verify that ultrasound paper clearly, gather enough evidence, and smash their last fragile hope. If it really was a forged play, I would make them pay a price 100,000 times worse than the humiliation she just caused my family today. The second David and his mother disappeared past the gate, my exhausted, resigned demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by sharp decisiveness. My parents anxiously asked why I gave in to them so easily. How could I just hand over my hard-earned assets to those ruthless people? I smiled and reassured them, affirming that I would not let them take a single dime. It was all just a stalling tactic, so I had time to investigate the truth. The first thing I did was contact a private investigator firm that attorney Robert had recommended. I sent them a covert photo I had taken of Chloe's ultrasound paper. The goal was very clear: verify the authenticity of the ultrasound, and check Chloe's medical records at the private clinic printed on the paper. With a hefty retainer paid, The PI team promised results within 24 business hours. While waiting for the investigation results, I needed to make my mother-in-law completely drop her guard. I proactively texted her with an incredibly soft tone, saying I had thought carefully about what she taught me. After all, we used to be family. I didn't want things to get too tense and affect the baby. I suggested she tell David to prep the paperwork, and this weekend I would meet to discuss withdrawing the theft report at the bank to unlock the account and give David his share for his new family. Exactly as calculated, greed instantly blinded that entire household. My mother-in-law texted back a barrage of joyful messages, praising me for knowing my place and promising to make David follow my requests. They completely believed I had been defeated by Chloe's pregnancy. At noon the next day, the PI called to meet me at a quiet cafe to discuss the job. The investigator slid a thin folder across the table, a smug look in his eyes, and provided information that made me laugh out loud at the naive recklessness of the other woman. According to their investigation into the clinic's internal system, Chloe did indeed go for a gynecological exam that day. But the diagnosis was completely normal. There were 0 signs of pregnancy. The ultrasound printout my mother-in-law proudly paraded around was a forgery bought online for a few $dozen, later doctored with editing software to match her name and date. The PI even provided screenshots of the transaction history from a private Facebook group specializing in fake novelty documents. Holding concrete proof in my hands, a ruthless plan formed in my mind. I did not intend to simply expose her by throwing the papers at them. I wanted my mother-in-law, the woman who hurled insults at my family for the sake of a grandson, to tear this filthy play apart with her own hands. I called Mrs. Higgins, an incredibly close neighbor of my mother-in-law, who was notorious for being the biggest gossip in their suburban block. I intentionally played the role of a discarded daughter-in-law, sadly confiding in Mrs. Higgins that Chloe was pregnant with a boy. I subtly dropped the information that I had a friend who was the head of obstetrics at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and they were currently running a program offering free premium 3D ultrasounds and anomaly screenings for family members. I asked Mrs. Higgins to pass the message to my mother-in-law, advising her to take Chloe there for a careful checkup, as modern food is full of toxins and first-time mothers face high health risks. A woman like my mother-in-law, widowed for years, desperate for an heir, who loved free things and wanted only the best, would definitely not pass up this opportunity. Mrs. Higgins enthusiastically patted her chest, taking on the job of relaying the information as quickly as possible. For the final step of the plan, I picked up the phone and called Dr. Kevin, my close friend who was the head of obstetrics at that hospital. I summarized the situation and asked him to support a little play right in his clinic. Kevin burst out laughing and agreed immediately, telling me to leave everything at the clinic to him. He guaranteed the results would be incredibly authentic and dramatic. The final net for the fake pregnancy had been intricately woven. I only had to sit and wait for the smug prey to walk right into the perfectly set trap, just to see how my mother-in-law's face would contort when she realized her precious grandson was just a piece of scrap paper. The next morning, I received a call from the PI firm. The manager reported that while expanding the investigation into Chloe's social circle, they discovered an earth-shattering secret that went far beyond a standard affair or asset dispute. The severity of the information forced me to take the morning off and head to the meeting point to receive the file immediately. Sitting in a dark corner of the cafe, the investigator pushed a massive stack of documents toward me, beginning to explain every page with extreme caution. Chloe had a biological younger brother named Tyler, who was only 22 and a recent community college dropout. Despite having absolutely no experience or economic credentials, this young man was listed as the managing director of a limited liability company specializing in media and advertising called Apex Creative Media, LLC. I frowned, flipping through the copy of the business registration, discovering this company was established exactly 1 year ago, coinciding perfectly with the time Chloe was hired as David's subordinate. The investigator continued detailing the shocking findings. According to investigations into the cash flow and economic contracts of Apex Creative Media, they had virtually 0 outside clients. Their entire revenue came from contracts to provide event organization, banner printing, and internal promo campaigns for the very municipal agency where David worked. I immediately recognized the massive problem hidden behind these invoices. David was the director of operations, the person with the authority to propose and sign off on service providers for the agency. Exploiting management loopholes, David conspired with Chloe to set up a shell company with her brother as a puppet director to bypass regulations. For the past year, David had continuously funneled lucrative agency contracts to Apex Creative Media at heavily inflated prices, way above market rates. I flipped to the last page of the file, which compiled bank statements showing transfers from the city treasury to the shell company's accounts. The total payments over the past 12 months exceeded $250,000. It was a massive sum embezzled from taxpayer funds, flowing straight into the couple's private pockets. Using this money, they lived lavishly, taking luxury trips. David even quietly put down a deposit on a luxury condo under Chloe's name. Though the title transfer wasn't complete yet, David's greed had crossed the line from a cheating husband to a full-blown criminal. Defrauding a government agency was no longer a civil dispute within the family. This was felony embezzlement. The penalty could mean years in federal or state prison. I paid the PI's contract in full, adding a massive bonus to thank them for their efficient and professional work. Holding the heavy file in my hands, I walked to my car. The harsh midday sun glaring through the tinted windows illuminated the thoughts churning in my head. I knew I was holding a weapon of absolute destruction, enough to send both David and Chloe to prison. But I wouldn't fire it just yet. I had to choose the exact moment they thought they were safest to deliver the killing blow, entirely cutting off the escape route for these flawed humans, forcing them to pay for every dirty dollar they stole. The plan to use Mrs. Higgins to lure my mother-in-law into the trap went smoother than expected. Just 2 days after I leaked the free premium ultrasound rumor, I received a text from Dr. Kevin saying my mother-in-law had personally dragged Chloe in to register. Kevin told me to relax and work, and get ready to hear the recap of an Oscar-worthy performance from his clinic. At exactly 3:00 p.m., my phone rang. Kevin called to recount the entire event, his voice brimming with satisfaction. Kevin said my mother-in-law strutted into the clinic acting incredibly entitled, bragging loudly to the nurses that her future daughter-in-law was carrying the air, demanding the most thorough examination from the head doctor himself. Chloe walked beside her looking timid and eager to escape, but my mother-in-law gripped her arm tight, dragging her right to Kevin's desk, leaving no way out. Following the agreed-upon script, Kevin asked Chloe to provide her old ultrasound to put in her medical file for comparison. Chloe panicked, making up an excuse that she forgot it at home, sweating bullets. But my mother-in-law swiftly pulled the printout right out of her purse and handed it to the doctor. She had been carrying that fake paper around like a lucky charm to show off to the whole neighborhood. Kevin took the paper, put on his glasses to examine it, purposely frowned, and loudly questioned it in the crowded waiting room. He pointed right at the paper and told my mother-in-law, "The stamp on this paper from that private clinic is forged, and the doctor who signed at the bottom doesn't even exist in the state medical board's licensing registry." My mother-in-law's face instantly dropped, and she aggressively denied it, saying the doctor must be looking at it wrong. Kevin didn't argue. He instructed the nurse to put Chloe on the bed for a transvaginal ultrasound immediately, insisting that everything must be based on actual imaging, not a flawed piece of paper. Chloe panicked completely, faking stomach cramps to refuse getting on the exam table. But suspicion had already sparked in my mother-in-law's mind. She angrily forced Chloe to lie down, scolding her that ultrasounds don't hurt, and if the baby is healthy, there's nothing to fear. The ultrasound monitor flickered on, and Kevin intentionally turned the screen fully outward so my mother-in-law could see every detail. He ran the wand over Chloe's abdomen multiple times, then loudly announced the results in front of everyone. The uterus was completely empty. No embryo, no amniotic sac. The uterine lining was paper-thin, proving she was absolutely not pregnant. Kevin concluded that the old paper was 100% a photoshopped scam, warning the older woman to be careful not to get defrauded. The truth was laid bare right in the middle of a major hospital clinic. My mother-in-law stood frozen for several seconds. Her pride in her grandson shattered into a million pieces. She realized she had been led by the nose and blatantly conned by a little tramp who used a fake pregnancy to extort money and try to steal her family's assets. Rage exploded. My mother-in-law lunged forward, grabbing Chloe by the hair as she scrambled up from the exam bed. She delivered 2 stinging slaps to Chloe's face that echoed down the clinic hallway, cursing her as a filthy scammer for daring to use children to con her elders. Chloe didn't dare fight back. She covered her face, crying, pushed the door open, and ran for her life out of the hospital, leaving my mother-in-law screaming in the middle of a crowd of whispering, pointing patients. Listening to Kevin's story, the corners of my mouth curled into a cold smile. The pregnancy extortion play had officially closed in the most tragicomic way possible. That fake baby couldn't save the situation, It only accelerated the collapse of their alliance of lies. My mother-in-law finally tasted the feeling of betrayal and deception from the very people she tried so hard to protect. News of the fake pregnancy quickly reached David's ears. After being brutally cursed out over the phone by his own mother, who ordered him to kick Chloe to the curb, David frantically ran back to his apartment to confront his mistress. They no longer had the label of noble love or victims of circumstance. The truth being exposed made them turn on each other like wild animals backed into a corner. I kept the PI on retainer to track their every move, ensuring I didn't miss any desperate maneuvers. That night, at a rundown cafe deep in an alley, David and Chloe met and argued so loudly that the people at the next table could hear every word. David blamed Chloe for deceiving him, causing him to lose all face with his family and destroying his chance to negotiate for his share of the assets from me. He declared their relationship over, demanding Chloe pack her bags and move back to her hometown that very night. But Chloe was no longer the naive, crying, begging girl. The mask fell off, revealing her true nature as a ruthless, calculating thug. Chloe slammed her hands on the table, stood up, pointed right at David's face, smirked, and clearly stated, "You think you can just dump me now? Not a chance." Chloe admitted the pregnancy was fake, but the $250,000 they embezzled from the municipal agency through her brother's shell company was very real. She made it clear that all the fake contracts, transfer invoices, and work emails sent via encrypted accounts had been completely backed up onto a hidden flash drive. Chloe blatantly demanded extortion, forcing David to give her $50,000 in cash as compensation for her lost youth and reputation. She threatened that if she didn't get the money by tomorrow, she would hand that flash drive straight to the district attorney's office. Chloe coldly stated that at worst, she'd get a slap on the wrist as a minor accomplice, but the manager who directly signed and approved the funding David would absolutely rot in federal prison. Hearing district attorney, David panicked, his face turning ghostly pale with fear. He knew exactly how aggressively the government pursued embezzlement. A divorce dispute might lose him money, but embezzlement would cost him his life. David clumsily lowered his voice, begging Chloe for more time to scrape together that massive amount of cash. But where would the money come from? His legitimate savings account was legally locked by my banking maneuvers, and the divorce petition dividing our assets was officially docketed and frozen by the court. The embezzled money had already been poured into a down payment for a condo in Chloe's name that couldn't be quickly liquidated. In sheer, desperate panic, David decided to take a massive risk. He went to the mob for a high-interest loan. The next morning, the PI reported that David had gone to a predatory payday loan shark front operating out of a pawn shop near the city limits. With no valuable collateral, he decided to use his title as a government director to secure an unsecured loan. David brought his employee ID, his official appointment letter, and his original birth certificate as collateral, completely hiding the fact that he was currently suspended pending an investigation. Seeing a customer who was a high-ranking government official desperate for cash, the loan sharks agreed to disperse the funds immediately under a predatory daily vigorish structure. David gritted his teeth and signed the loan agreement at a cutthroat interest rate, a number high enough to drown anyone. Clutching $50,000 in cash stuffed in a black duffel bag, David called Chloe to meet at an empty lot in the suburbs to make the exchange for the flash drive of evidence. They thought that using money to silence each other could cover up their monstrous crimes, completely unaware that a much larger noose was waiting for them up ahead. While David was frantically carrying the duffel bag of mob money to buy Chloe's silence, I sat calmly in my office, reviewing the two thick files on my desk. People who do dirty deeds always harbor the naive thought that a little compromise and hush money will let them get away clean. But they didn't realize that Chloe's flash drive was not the only copy in existence. The evidence I held from the PI firm was infinitely more detailed, clear, and comprehensive than what she had saved. At exactly 10:00 a.m., I drove myself to the headquarters of the municipal agency where David worked. I personally submitted a formal whistleblower complaint to the Inspector General and the Internal Ethics Board. Simultaneously, with the help of Attorney Robert, the second file containing all evidence of the suspicious transactions was mailed directly to the Chicago Police Department's White-Collar Crimes Unit and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. The allegation of abusing authority to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars in government funds sent immediate shockwaves through the agency's leadership. The evidence I provided was brutally clear and detailed. The LLC registration for Chloe's brother's fake company, the forged service contracts David approved, and a mountain of bank statements showing the money flowing in circles before landing right back in David's personal accounts. The authorities immediately took on the case. However, investigating financial crimes is not an overnight process. The police needed time to trace the money, subpoena the shell company's accounts, depose related witnesses, and conduct a forensic audit to determine the exact financial damage to the state before pressing charges. For nearly 2 months after I filed the complaint, everything on the outside seemed strangely quiet. David remained smug, secretly thinking the pile of cash he handed Chloe in the suburbs that day had resolved everything, buying him absolute safety. He was even waiting for his suspension period to end so he could return to his director position as if nothing had ever happened. But the net of the law always closes silently and strictly. 2 months later, the internal audit and the secret police investigation finally concluded their evidence-gathering phase. Every corner of the cash flow, every forged signature was clearly forensically verified, leaving no room for denial. On that fateful morning, David had just sneakily returned to the office to pack his personal belongings and prepare for the handover of his duties when disaster struck. A task force comprising white-collar detectives and representatives from the state's attorney's office suddenly appeared in the administration department. They loudly read a search warrant for his workspace and an arrest warrant for David, right in front of dozens of stunned colleagues. David's desktop computer was instantly sealed. All bidding documents and accounting ledgers related to media contracts from the past 2 years were confiscated and packed into cardboard boxes. The police ordered David to cooperate, handcuffed him, and escorted him out to a waiting squad car in front of the lobby to be taken in for questioning regarding financial fraud. The news that the director of operations was led out of headquarters in handcuffs spread faster than a hurricane. At the exact same time, at a cheap apartment complex in the suburbs, another task force raided the unit, seizing phones and laptops, and hauling Chloe down to the precinct for questioning as a co-conspirator to embezzlement. The $50,000 she hadn't yet spent was immediately seized as evidence. The truth cannot be bought with money, nor can it be buried at the bottom of a river. I sat in a cafe across from David's agency, sipping warm tea, watching the police cruiser's lights flash as it faded down the main avenue. The game of hide-and-seek was officially over, making way for the strict punishment of the law. Because the case was incredibly complex, but the suspect, David, offered an initial confession and had a fixed address. After a week in lockup for questioning, he was granted bail. He was placed under house arrest, forbidden from leaving the jurisdiction, and required to carry his subpoena at all times for further questioning. Stepping out from behind the iron gates of the police precinct, David completely collapsed. He realized that the evidence the police presented during interrogation didn't come from Chloe's flash drive, but from meticulously compiled documents originating from a whistleblower inside his own family. He knew perfectly well there was only one person capable and cold-blooded enough to deliver this fatal strike. At 7:00 p.m., I was having dinner with my parents at their house when we heard frantic pounding on the front gate, loud shouting shattering the quiet evening. My dad frowned and went out to open the door. David rushed into the yard like a madman, clothes disheveled, a patchy beard on his face, looking haggard and 10 years older. Seeing me sitting in the living room, he charged straight in, ignoring my dad's angry attempts to stop him. David stumbled to the center of the room, abruptly dropped to his knees on the tiled floor, and buried his head against the edge of the sofa, his hands gripping the armrest. He sobbed loudly, calling my name, begging for his life, swearing that the little tramp Chloe had cast a spell on him and manipulated him into setting up the fake company, and that he inherently had no evil intention of stealing state funds. He used our 5 years of marriage as a shield, begging me to remember the time we shared a bed and save him from prison. David promised he would immediately sign over the entire high-rise condo, the SUV, and the savings account to me unconditionally. He just begged me to go to the police and file an affidavit to drop all the charges. My dad stood nearby watching this scene, his eyes overflowing with absolute disgust. A man who once acted high and mighty, blaming his wife for his own promiscuity, was now kneeling in cowardice, begging for pity with crocodile tears. I calmly put my rice bowl down on the table, carefully wiped my mouth with a napkin. I just sat on the sofa looking straight down at the top of the terrible man's head. I spoke clearly, my volume not loud but incredibly resolute. I told David to stop acting and blaming others. He was an adult man, a department head. Nobody put a knife to his throat and forced him to sign those fraudulent contracts. He chose to steal government money to buy houses and designer bags for his mistress. So now he had to have the spine to take responsibility before the law. I emphasized that embezzlement was not a family dispute that could just be dropped because the victim forgave him. The crime was committed against the state. All his begging was worthless. I reached for the folder sitting on the glass cabinet and pulled out the notice of hearing from the circuit court that I had received a few days prior. I tossed the paper, letting it float gently down onto the floor right next to David's knee, demanding he accept reality. The assets were earned by me. I would take them back through transparent legal channels at the upcoming divorce hearing. I did not need the charity or trade-offs of a criminal. I coldly dropped my final words to him. Save your strength to explain yourself to the judge. Don't waste your tears in my house. David looked up at me, his eyes filled with absolute despair upon realizing there was not a single chance for salvation. My dad marched over, grabbed David by the collar, dragged his ex-son-in-law out the gate, and locked it behind him with a dry click. Ignoring the pathetic wails echoing down the empty street, I returned to the dining table. The biggest storm had passed. Now it was time to wait for a fair judgment from the justice system. 2.5 months passed since the day I filed the lawsuit. The Cook County Circuit Court officially opened the preliminary hearing for the divorce case between me and David. Because the case involved dividing significant assets and showed signs of severe marital misconduct, the judge handled it very carefully. That morning, I walked into the courtroom in crisp corporate attire, accompanied by attorney Robert, exuding absolute confidence. On the opposite side, David sat slouched next to his public defender, his face visibly emaciated after days of intense interrogation by financial investigators. To open the trial, the judge asked both sides to state their desires. I kept my tone firm, requesting the court grant an immediate divorce because the purpose of the marriage was destroyed. Regarding the assets, I requested full ownership of the downtown condo, the SUV, and the $70,000 in the savings account. David's lawyer immediately stood up to object fiercely. He cited family law, arguing that all assets acquired during the marriage must be split 50-50, according to basic guidelines. He emphasized that David was the breadwinner who made significant contributions to maintaining the home, so he could not leave empty-handed. He made excuses that David's mistakes were just moments of weakness. My lawyer, Robert, calmly stood up and presented sharp counter-evidence. He loudly submitted to the judge all my pay stubs from the past 5 years, proving the primary source of income used to buy the house and car came entirely from my labor. Next, Robert played the video evidence of the adultery filmed right inside our condo. Along with that were the text messages showing David conspiring with his mistress to steal the $70,000 savings. The evidence laid out so clearly made the opposing side's argument for a 50-50 split look ridiculous. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense. The judge sternly questioned David about bringing another woman into the home while his wife was away. David stammered in denial, trying to salvage things by saying it was just a temporary lapse in judgment because his wife was always away and his work was too stressful. However, his weak arguments were quickly crushed by the receipts for expensive designer goods and plane tickets for vacations with his mistress. The judge laid it out very clearly. The law protects the legitimate rights of both parties, but it also severely punishes grave ethical violations, especially intentional destruction of the marital home and conspiring to hide joint assets, causing harm to the spouse. After a tense recess, the judge officially handed down the ruling. Based on the undeniable evidence, the fault leading to the breakdown of the marriage rested entirely on David. To protect the legitimate rights of the wife, the court awarded full ownership of the condo and the SUV to me. As for the $70,000 savings, noting that the origin was mostly my bonuses and that David had intent to illegally seize it, the court ruled I would keep $60,000. The remaining $10,000 was awarded to David, but this money was immediately frozen by order of the state's attorney to serve the embezzlement case preparing for criminal trial. The sharp crack of the judge's gavel echoed decisively. The trial ended. David collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands, crying silently because he had lost everything. Greed and betrayal had finally extracted a proportionate price from him. I held the judgment in my hand, walking out the courthouse doors with a sense of relief washing over my entire body. The sky outside was blue and sunny. The toxic marriage was officially buried under transparent legal ink. 6 months passed since the day I received my official divorce decree. My life gradually settled into a stable orbit. Work was going smoothly, and new projects were massively successful, bringing me large bonuses worthy of my effort. Meanwhile, the price the betrayers had to pay was just the beginning of their dark days. In November, The federal court opened the criminal trial related to the embezzlement ring at the municipal agency where David used to work. I attended the hearing as an interested party, witnessing the final outcome for the man who once shared my bed. Inside the massive courtroom, David stood at the defense table in a prison jumpsuit. He looked 20 years older, his hair peppered with gray, his hollow face completely stripped of the arrogant aura of the director he once was. Standing next to him was Chloe, the woman who had once confidently challenged me, now a frail, trembling mess, gripping the wooden railing, her eyes bloodshot from crying. In the family gallery, David's mother sat hugging her knees, sobbing intermittently, not daring to look up at anyone in the room. The prosecutor read a 14-page indictment. Every single violation was exposed in excruciating detail. Abusing his position as director of operations, David had conspired with Chloe to set up a front company named Apex Creative Media in her brother's name. They forged a series of portfolios and fake contracts to provide services to the agency. Taxpayer money was shuffled around and ultimately funneled straight into the personal pockets of David and Chloe, totaling over $250,000. This wasn't just internal corporate misconduct. It was a severe felony that directly assaulted state assets. Faced with ironclad evidence including invoices, wire transfers, and the flash drive containing all the classified data seized by the police, David and Chloe had absolutely no way to deny their crimes. David choked up, confessing to all the charges, making excuses that it was momentary greed and the pressure of needing money to buy a house for his mistress. Chloe cried, blaming David for forcing her to do it, claiming she was just a subordinate with no power to decide or sign documents. However, the law has no room for treacherous excuses. At the end of the trial, the judge read the verdict on behalf of the court. The defendant, David, was guilty of abuse of power and embezzlement, sentenced to 5 years in state prison. The defendant, Chloe, in her role as an accomplice aiding in the concealment and consumption of stolen property, received a 3-year suspended sentence, with 5 years of strict probation. Furthermore, both defendants were held jointly liable to fully restitute the $250,000 stolen from the state. The wailing cry of David's mother tore through the courtroom when she heard the 5-year prison sentence handed down to her only son, the boy she always proudly boasted about. The bailiffs approached, handcuffed David, and escorted him out to the transport van heading to the penitentiary. Chloe walked out of the courthouse on unsteady legs, her vacant eyes staring at nothing. I sat quietly in the back row, witnessing the entire play come to a close. There was no smugness, no triumphant laughter. I only felt the quiet presence of justice being strictly executed. The path they chose was paved with lies, and its final destination was the harshest sentence of the law. The criminal sentence was not the end of the tragedies David and Chloe brought upon themselves. While the $250,000 restitution hung over David's head, he also left behind a terrifying debt from the underworld. The $50,000 he took from the loan sharks to buy Chloe's silence. With the cutthroat interest rate compounding daily, and David now rotting behind bars, the loan sharks immediately shifted their focus to the remaining people to collect the debt by jungle law. Their first target was David's biological mother. Even though David took out the loan in his own name, the unwritten rule of the underworld has always been the son owes, the mother pays. Once the main debtor went to prison, the thugs immediately went after his only relative on the outside. Just days after the trial, a group of tattooed thugs showed up and threw red paint all over her front door in the dead of night. They sent people to stand in her alley every day, cursing, gluing her locks, and threatening to seize her house if the principal and interest weren't paid in full. The compounding interest caused the debt to balloon to a horrifying number in a very short time. Unable to handle the pressure, the gossip of the neighbors, and the fear that the thugs might hurt her physically, David's mother tearfully sold her only suburban home for a dirt-cheap price to pay off the massive debt for her precious son. Losing her house, losing her son, and carrying the stigma of a child in prison for embezzlement, she broke down completely. She had to rent a tiny, damp studio apartment on the far outskirts of the city, scraping by on her meager pension. No one in the neighborhood wanted anything to do with her. She lived alone, wandering the market to buy bruised vegetables. Her dream of an heir and an obedient daughter-in-law was completely shattered. Her own tolerance for evil and her bottomless greed had helped push her son off a cliff and plunged her into homelessness in her twilight years. As for Chloe, even though she escaped prison time with a suspended sentence, her life was no different from hell on earth. The loan sharks knew perfectly well that Chloe was the one who walked away with the $50,000 cash during the exchange in the suburbs. Even though she tearfully explained the money was seized by the police as evidence, the thugs wouldn't let her go. They constantly stalked her, beat her, and bombarded her with death threats. In absolute panic, Chloe broke her lease in the middle of the night, packed a few clothes, and fled back to her rural hometown to escape the debt. However, news of the shocking embezzlement case involving the hometown girl had spread back there faster than the wind, carrying a suspended sentence, labeled a homewrecker and a thief of state funds. She was shunned. Neighbors whispered and pointed every time she stepped out the gate. Her family, drowning in shame, kept their doors locked all day. With a dark criminal record and a terrible reputation, Chloe couldn't get a decent job at any local factory or office. She had to hide in the house, living off her elderly parents, facing the contempt of the entire town, and suffering from restless nightmares about debt collectors. The price of her greed and materialistic lifestyle completely incinerated the future of a young woman. After all the legal troubles were smoothly resolved and the terrible people received their deserved sentences, I decided to completely clean up my life. The first thing I did was list the 12th floor condo for sale. Even though it was bought with my money and curated with my effort, it held too many toxic memories. I didn't want to come home from work every night, open the door, and see the hallway where I stood filming that video, or the bedroom that was stained by betrayal. The condo sold very quickly to a young couple at a fair price, helping me entirely shed the psychological burden. Taking the money from the sale, plus the savings the law returned to me, I decided to reward myself with an entirely new living space. I bought a luxury penthouse in a high-end development overlooking the Chicago River, featuring absolute security, quiet surroundings, and a panoramic view of the entire city. I personally picked out every piece of furniture, completely changing the design style to modern minimalism. The new home was flooded with natural light, devoid of any shadow of the past, holding only the peace of the present. In December, when the first winter chill swept through the streets of Chicago, I hosted a small, intimate housewarming party at my new place. The only guests were my parents, Jessica, the sharp PR guru, and attorney Robert, the people who stood by my side through the stormiest days. The atmosphere was incredibly warm. The smell of roasted meat filled the air, blending with the aroma of red wine radiating from the dining table. Laughter echoed through the luxurious living room. My mother placed a piece of meat in my bowl, her eyes welling with tears of joy, saying, "Seeing you stand up this strong, your father and I can finally close our eyes in peace." My dad raised his wine glass, patting Robert on the shoulder, thanking him profusely for helping the family through the crisis and fighting for justice. Jessica sat next to me, nudging my arm playfully, teasing that I was now a golden bachelorette and needed to dress up to find a much better man. Her joke made the whole table burst into laughter. I chuckled, raising my glass to clink with Jessica's, telling everyone, "Right now, I am very satisfied with my free life. I am no longer afraid of marriage, but I am in no rush to find a new harbor either. I want to dedicate all my time and energy to advancing my career, taking care of my parents, and traveling to places I love." The pain of the old marriage didn't break me. It became a priceless lesson that forged my resilience and decisiveness. The party ended in complete joy, marking a brilliant new beginning. When all the guests left, I stood alone on the windy balcony, looking down at the river shimmering with city lights. A feeling of relief and freedom spread through every breath. I fought tenaciously to protect my honor and assets. I used the law to punish the wrongdoers. And most importantly, I defeated the darkness within my own soul. The old book was completely closed. Tomorrow the sun would rise, and I was ready to write a new, much brighter chapter for my life. 3 years passed since those horrifying events, and my life reached an entirely new level. Through relentless effort and consecutive successful projects bringing in massive revenue, I earned the trust of the executive board and was promoted to regional director for the Midwest. Work was much busier with domestic and international business trips, but my income and status leaped forward significantly. I was content with my financial independence and the solid peace in my soul. The past regarding the cheating husband and the shameless mistress was faded by time, becoming distant names never to be mentioned in my life again. One late June Sunday, the Chicago sun beat down like fire, the outdoor temperature soaring near 100 degrees. I was sitting in the home office of my penthouse, reviewing a crucial bidding portfolio when my phone rang. A partner required a hard copy with a wet signature delivered to their office in the next district before noon to complete processing. Unable to drive there myself because I was tied up in a Zoom meeting with the CEO, I quickly used an app on my phone to request an Uber Connect delivery courier for the urgent document. About 15 minutes later, the app notified me the driver had arrived at the lobby. I carefully sealed the portfolio in a stiff envelope, grabbed some cash for a tip, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. Stepping out of the air-conditioned lobby, the heat radiating from the asphalt hit my face, making me squint. In the guest loading zone, a man wearing the neon green jacket of a food delivery app was sitting on a beat-up scooter. He used his sleeve to wipe the heavy sweat off his forehead, glancing around searching for the customer. I walked toward the scooter, calling out the license plate number to confirm. Hearing my voice, the driver quickly pulled off his three-quarter helmet to reply. The moment he looked up, time seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Under the glaring sun, the man's face was sun-baked and gaunt, his deep-set eyes showing obvious signs of hardship. His cropped hair was heavily peppered with gray, unable to hide his aging and exhaustion. It was David. David had just been paroled from prison a few months early for good behavior. Carrying the felony record of embezzling state assets, there was no way he could return to a corporate path or find any decent office job. To survive and pay off the loan shark debt that still haunted his mother, the once arrogant director now had to run delivery apps, braving the sun and rain across the city streets. Seeing me standing before him in an elegant designer corporate dress, exuding the confident and radiant aura of a female executive, holding the document envelope, David's eyes widened in shock. His calloused hands gripped the handlebars so tight his knuckles turned bone white. Shame, humiliation, and regret surged in the eyes of the terrible man. David bowed his head, purposely avoiding my direct gaze, his shoulders slumping as if trying to shrink away and hide from the disgrace. I stood quietly observing him, my heart completely still. There was no hatred, no bitter sarcasm, and absolutely no trace of pity rising up. In my eyes at this moment, he was simply a stranger providing a delivery service. I stepped forward and handed the document envelope to David, clearly and professionally stating the delivery address and the recipient's phone number. David took the envelope with trembling hands, giving a slight nod, not daring to utter a single word. I pulled the highest denomination bill from my wallet and placed it in his hand as a tip, using a calm voice to thank the driver. Having said that, I decisively turned on my heel, walking straight toward the luxurious glass doors of the high-rise. The cold air from the HVAC system rushed out to embrace my body, completely banishing the suffocating heat of the summer. I did not look back even once, ignoring the sound of the beat-up scooter engine revving up and blending into the rushing traffic of the city. Life is a series of choices, and everyone must pay a heavy price for their own wrong ones.